The last time I saw my son alive, his wife was timing his breaths with the stopwatch on her phone. Not with concern, but with the cold, detached focus of a scientist observing a dying specimen. 3 days later, that same chilling precision was aimed at me. What are you even looking for? That's your suitcase. You're a burden in this house. Serafina's voice, usually a silken purr, was as brittle as frozen glass. She shoved my worn suitcase off the porch and it landed on the manicured lawn with a sickening thud. The sound was too loud in the crisp, salt-tinged air of Port Aileron, a sound heavy with years of my silent tolerance. She stood framed in the doorway of the house my son had built, her arms crossed over a cashmere cedar, the color of ash. Her grief was a costume and she wore it exquisitely. "You have 3 days to get out," she stated, her words devoid of emotion. "I've already scheduled a locksmith." I didn't answer. My gaze was fixed on the suitcase, a relic from a happier time. One of the wheels was shattered. Liam had stitched his initials into the leather handle when he'd saved up to buy it for me, before a trip to see my sister in Vermont. I'd used it maybe 5 times, this would be the 6th. I bent down my knees, protesting, and righted the bag. The zipper was ajar, a glimpse of my life spilling out my neatly folded scarves, the plastic pill organizer for my blood pressure, and a manila envelope containing the one document that had shattered my world. Liam's death certificate. She hadn't even bothered to close it properly before discarding me. When I looked up, she was already turning away, dismissing me as if I were just another piece of clutter to be cleared. Now that the funeral was over, her performance of the grieving widow was complete. I dragged the broken suitcase down the cobblestone path to the curb and sat on the cold granite, the sea wind whipping strands of gray hair across my face. I pulled out my phone, my fingers clumsy. The first number I dialed wasn't for a taxi, a friend, or even my cousin who'd offered me her spare room. "County Records Office." Brisk voice answered. "Yes." I said, my own voice, surprisingly steady, a calm thread in a tapestry of chaos. "I'd like to request a property deed verification." I gave her the address, the one where Serafina was likely already choosing new paint colors. "I am the co-owner of the residence. I believe there may be some confusion about whose name is on the title, because that was the thing." Serafina thought I was powerless. She saw a quiet, grieving old woman, but she was wrong. I was just polite, and my politeness had just expired 3 days earlier. We had buried Liam, pancreatic cancer. A thief in the night had stolen him in less than a year. One moment he was a vibrant architect chasing our little Noah around the yard with a water hose. The next he was a gaunt, silent figure, tethered to machines that beat a frantic rhythm against the slow, final cadence of his breathing. Serafina had been composed through it, all too composed, when the hospice nurse finally pronounced him gone. She didn't shed a tear. She checked her watch as I stood clutching my son's still warm hand. A primal scream trapped in my throat. She was on the phone with the funeral director, discussing floral arrangements and casket linings. Should have been my first sign at the funeral. She wore a black silk dress and a single strand of pearls. An outfit not of mourning but of immaculate control. She had orchestrated every detail. I wasn't permitted to speak, not even a simple reading. "It's for the best, Eleanor," she'd said, touching my arm with fingers as cold as her heart. "You might get too emotional at my only child's funeral." So I stood in a back pew, an anonymous mourner at the service of the boy I brought into this world. I accepted stiff, awkward hugs and answered whispered condolences with a fragile smile I borrowed from a stronger version of myself. All the while Serafina held court at the front, playing the tragic widow in a one-woman show she'd written and directed. The real tears didn't come until I was alone. The rage didn't come until she threw me out. Our relationship had always been a fragile truth maintained. For Liam's sake, in the early years, she'd made an effort, her charm, as bright and sharp as a newly minted coin. But after the wedding, a subtle chill set in. Liam's weekly calls became bi-weekly texts. Unannounced visits were frowned upon. I was gently, surgically excised from their life, pushed aside like a piece of inherited furniture that no longer fit her minimalist aesthetic. And I let it happen for Liam, for peace, but even he had started to notice. Once I brought over his favorite beef stew, calling ahead. As instructed, he met me in the garage, pulling me into a tight hug before sneaking through the back door, like contraband. "She doesn't mean anything by it, Mom," he'd whispered, his eyes pleading. "She's just stressed." That was always the excuse. Stressed, busy, anxious, but now I was the one who was grieving. I had buried my son, and she was trying to bury me from his life, his home memory. So no, I didn't argue. I packed my bags, every folded sweater a prayer, every photograph a memory she couldn't touch. I watched her toss my life onto the lawn, and then I made a call to someone who remembered the truth. The surveyor, a man named Henderson, with a clipboard and an air of weird neutrality, arrived on Thursday morning. I met him at the gate, offering him a thermos of coffee and the original deed papers. Liam and I had signed together years before Serafina was even in the picture, joint tenancy, with right of survivorship. I said, my finger tracing the line of text filed in before the marriage. Henderson adjusted his glasses, his eyes scanning the document. "And this is still the active deed?" I nodded. "Liam never changed it. Her name was never added. She just assumed." He let out a low whistle. "A lot of folks assume. They think marriage is a magic wand." He spent an hour walking the perimeter, taking photos and making notes. The official report would take a few days, but we both knew the legal reality. The house was half mine, and with Liam gone, without a legally amended will, it was all mine. Serafina, in her haste and arrogance, hadn't consulted a lawyer. She hadn't checked county records. She hadn't even looked in the fireproof lockbox Liam had once told me to keep, just in case. But I had, and now her 3-day deadline had become my new beginning. I wasn't leaving. I was moving back in that night in a sterile motel room down the highway, a place that smelled of lavender, air freshener, and quiet desperation. I opened Liam's old laptop. It was the one he'd used in his final months. The one Serafina, with her aversion to anything she couldn't control, had never touched. He'd never changed the password, and inside, filed away in the digital corners of his life, I found more than just old family photos. I found the first horrifying clue that my son's death wasn't just a tragedy, it was a conspiracy. They say a mother always knows. I used to believe that until the day I realized I hadn't truly heard my son's voice. His real, unguarded voice. In almost a year, Liam was my late in life miracle, a blessing. After a string of heartbreaking losses, he came into the world quiet and observant, the same way he left it. But in the years between, he was the kindest soul you could ever meet as a boy. He preferred books to toys, quiet conversations to loud parties. He was my partner, my team. I thought nothing could ever come between us. Then came Serafina. She wasn't overtly cruel. Her methods were far more subtle. She knew how to smile for photographs, how to compliment a meal while subtly undermining it. The first Thanksgiving, after they were engaged, I made Liam's favorite sausage, cornbread stuffing, a recipe passed down from his grandfather. Serafina took a single delicate bite. "Oh," she'd said, her smile never wavering. "How rustic." Liam never asked for it again. By the time they were married, she had him on a strict regimen of organic kale, mindfulness apps, and emotional boundaries. He started using phrases that sounded foreign in his mouth. "We need to protect our peace, Mom. Our peace." As if I were the storm he needed. Protection from his calls dwindled. The distance grew, and I let it happen, because I thought, that's what good mothers do. They let go. They allow their sons to build their own lives, even if it means being left on the outside looking in. When Noah was born, I thought I'd be needed again. And for a while I was. Serafina had a difficult C-section, and I moved in for 2 weeks, cooking, cleaning, and rocking my grandson to sleep. I cherished every moment, breathing in sweet baby smell, feeling that fierce protective love all over again. But as soon as she recovered, the gates came down. Noah's overstimulated. Today, Eleanor were trying to limit visitors to give him a calm environment. My role was terminated. Then came the call that changed everything. They found something. "Mom," Liam's voice was a strained whisper over the phone. "Pancreas stage 4. I stood frozen in my small kitchen, a dish towel in one hand, my world collapsing. I moved into their guest room, a week later, offering to pay rent. Serafina waved it off, not with kindness, but with a dismissive air. "Try not to create extra work." she'd said as the months wore on. I noticed chilling patterns. She managed all his appointments, all his medications. The details are too stressful for him, she'd claim, but Liam wasn't just being shielded. He was being isolated. One day I asked him, honey, do you know what the latest scans showed? He looked at me with his tired, hollowed eyes. I don't ask, Mom, Serafina says. I should just focus on feeling good. But he wasn't feeling good. He was wasting away when I dared to bring up an article about a clinical trial. Serafina shut me down instantly. We are following the doctor's plan. Eleanor, let's not confuse him with false hope. False hope. Not, let's stay positive. Not, we'll look into it. False hope. As if she preferred him to be resigned and in his final weeks. He was exactly that, sedated, silent, surrendered grief. Doesn't walk a straight line. It circles back, a predator in the dark. After Liam's funeral, my grief didn't just ache. It itched. It felt like an injustice. A story with the last page torn out, and Serafina had forgotten one crucial detail in her meticulous plan. Liam never changed his passwords in the motel room. I pulled out his old MacBook. The password was Starfish 1998, the year he won the state science fair for his project on marine echinoderms. My throat tightened. He hadn't changed a thing. I navigated through folders of architectural drawings and tax documents until I found a subfolder labeled Miss E inside a file named S. Trips to. Blood ran cold. There she was. Serafina laughing, her head thrown back in ecstasy, one arm wrapped around a handsome sun-kissed man. I didn't recognize they were on a pristine white sand beach. A tropical sunset painting. The sky behind them. She was wearing a crimson swimsuit. The same one she'd worn when she came home from a supposed spa weekend with her cousin a week before Liam died. But this wasn't a spa, and that man wasn't her cousin. My hands trembled as I scrolled. Serafina, on a hotel balcony, a champagne flute in her hand. Serafina, and the man Julian Croft, according to a photo tag, holding hands, on a boardwalk. The timestamps were a brutal, systematic gut punch. May 10th. Liam was admitted to hospice. May 12th. Serafina was kissing Julian on a catamaran. May 15th. Liam's breathing became labored. May 16th. She was back home dressed in somber tones, holding my hand and talking about how hard this all was. I backed away from the screen. A wave of nausea washing over me. I should have felt pure rage. But what I felt was a sickening sense of recognition. The late nights, she claimed, were for clearing her head. The missed hospice visits. It wasn't stress. It was freedom. I dove into his email archives, searched for Julian's name. Nothing, but then I searched the drafts folder. There was one message. Saved, but never sent. Dated 2 weeks before he died. Mom, if you're reading this, I guess I couldn't find the words. Something is wrong. I think S is lying about the money, about the will. She won't let me talk to anyone. But her doctor. I'm scared. But I'm too tired to fight anymore. Please. If something happens, don't let her get away with it. I love you. The blinking cursor at the end of text felt like a heartbeat. His last desperate attempt to be heard. He knew he had saved it. But he hadn't been able to send. Was he too weak? Too drugged? Or had she seen him now? I had it. Motive, opportunity, and suspicion hardened into certainty. The next morning I went to the town library and searched public records. And there it was. A new will filed just 2 days before Liam passed, witnessed by one of Serafina's colleagues. The signature, Liam Alistair Prescott, was a shaky, unfamiliar scroll. I pulled up a photo on my phone of the last birthday card he sent me. The signatures didn't even remotely match. She had forged it. The very document that gave her my son's house, his assets, his legacy and guardianship of his child. My grandson. I had motive, method, and her mistake. But I couldn't do this alone. I needed my own team. I needed the Tidewater Sentinels. If you think the elderly move slowly, you've never seen a group of retired professionals. Smell a rat. It had been years since I'd seen Arthur, Vivian, and Silas in the same room. We used to joke about forming a club called the Tidewater Sentinels. A nod to the coastal town we'd all chosen for retirement. We never made it official, but I always knew who to call if the truth needed an advocate. Arthur Kensington was a retired judge. A man whose mind was still as sharp as a closing argument. His small cottage was overflowing with law books and a quiet, unshakable sense of justice. Vivian Reed had been a tenacious investigative reporter for the Boston Globe, the kind who never took no for an answer. She now ran the local bookstore, but her instincts were far from tired. And Silas Black, a former PI, was a man who moved through the world with an unnerving stillness. He spent his days restoring old wooden boats, but he could still uncover a secret faster than anyone I knew. I called Arthur first. "I need help," was all I said. "My place Tuesday," he replied with hesitation. "Oh, bring a pie." When I arrived, Vivian and Silas were already there, a pot of strong coffee brewing. Vivian had a notepad labeled Project Nightingale, a grimly appropriate code name. Silas was whittling a small piece of driftwood, his focus absolute. So Arthur began adjusting his reading glasses. "Who's the target?" "Serafina Prescott," I said. "My daughter-in-law." Vivian raised an eyebrow, the porcelain doll with the 100-watt smile and the vacant eyes. I nodded, then laid everything out on his heavy oak table: printouts of the photos, a copy of the forged will, Liam's unsent email. I told them everything. Her chilling composure, her isolation of Liam, the eviction. By the time I finished, Vivian's jaw was tight and Arthur was already scribbling on a legal pad. Silas had stopped whittling. "You're saying," Silas said, his voice a low rumble, "that she used his illness as cover to liquidate his assets while carrying on an affair? And I believe she forged the will to secure the rest." I added, my voice steady. "Good God," Arthur murmured. "I've seen corporations with fewer Machiavellian tendencies." "She's arrogant," Vivian stated. "She thinks she's smarter than everyone else. That makes her sloppy. That means we can catch her." I looked at each of them. "My friends, my sentinels, will you help me?" Arthur folded his arms. "Let's divide and conquer." He pointed a pen at Vivian. "You dig into Julian Croft financials, social media, past relationships. Find out if he's a gigolo or a partner in crime." He turned to Silas. "A look at Liam's official medical records. Quietly. I want to know exactly what medications he was on, who administered them, and when." Then he looked at me. "And you, Eleanor? You do nothing. No calls, no confrontations. You are a grieving, displaced mother. That is your role for now." Vivian smirked. "Oh, she's not just going to grieve. She's going to outlive and outsmart." A small, fierce smile touched my lips for the first time in days. "That's the plan. The truth, once you start digging for it, has a way of crawling out of the dark." It took them less than 2 weeks. Vivian was the first to strike gold. "He's not just fling, Eleanor," she said over the phone, her voice tight with disgust. "Julian Croft is a professional. He has a history of romancing vulnerable, wealthy women. And guess what? Serafina has been paying the lease on his luxury condo in Portland for the last 18 months in cash." The words felt like stones in my gut. While Liam was getting sicker, she was bankrolling her lover. Meanwhile, Silas, the ghost, had worked his quiet magic. He'd had a chance conversation with a night shift nursing aide at the hospice center. The aide remembered Serafina well, always on her phone. She'd said never cried, never once stayed the night. She insisted on managing his pain medication herself, said she had a pharmaceutical background. But the head nurse told me that wasn't true. Then came the damning detail. The aide saw Serafina have Liam sign a stack of insurance papers when he was heavily sedated and barely conscious, willing to sign a sworn statement. Arthur had sent the forged will and the birthday card to a trusted forensics expert. 3 days later we met in his study, there thick with the smell of old paper and imminent victory. "It's a forgery," Arthur said simply, "and not even a good one." The expert said, "Pen pressure, the slant, the very formation of the letters. It's a different hand entirely. The notary she used, his license expired 2 years ago. He's a friend of Julian's." Silas then slid a small flash drive across the table. "Audio," he said, "from a bug I planted at their favorite coffee shop." He hit play on his laptop. Serafina's voice, sharp and conspiratorial, filled the room. "He's barely hanging on, Jules. I need to get this filed before the next competency evaluation. If the hospice changes his meds, he might actually become lucid again." Then Julian's smooth voice, "Just get it done, babe. Think of Marina. Think of us." That was it. That was everything. Arthur looked at me, his eyes fierce.
We have her forgery, fraud, and a strong case for medical neglect and wrongful death. We can trigger a full criminal investigation. And guardianship of Noah, Vivian added softly. We can petition for immediate temporary custody. Arthur confirmed. I sank into a leather armchair, my knees suddenly weak for months. I had doubted my own sanity, wondering if grief was making me paranoid, but I hadn't been imagining it. The truth had been there all along, waiting for someone stubborn enough to look for it. We spent the rest of the night planning our final move. Arthur would file a motion to contest the will and freeze all assets. Vivian would leak the story to a trusted colleague at the Globe, ready to publish if Serafina fought back, and I would host a dinner. A final family gathering, one last supper before the reckoning, cooked for 2 days straight. Roast chicken, garlic, mashed potatoes. Liam's favorite creamy green bean casserole. I used the fine china he grew up with. The set Serafina had once called quaint and banished to the attic. I invited the whole family. Liam's aunts, uncles, cousins. I wanted to honor my son with the people who had actually loved him. Serafina arrived dressed in a severe gray dress, a mask of feigned humility firmly in place. Is this a celebration, Eleanor? She asked, looking around. My small apartment. A flicker of suspicion in her eyes. Of course, I said, my voice warm. A dinner to honor Liam's memory properly. The mood was warm, nostalgic. We shared stories, we laughed. It almost felt normal then. As dessert was served, Arthur cleared his throat. If you all don't mind, Eleanor has invited me to share something. A legal clarification. If you will. Serafina stiffened. Arthur placed a folder on the table. This, he said, his voice resonating with judicial authority, is Liam's original will dated 2016. It clearly designates his mother, Eleanor Prescott, as his sole heir, and the guardian of his son. A gasp went around the table. That's absurd. Serafina snapped, standing. The will was updated. Yes, Arthur said, holding up a second document. With this forged version you submitted. Signed when Liam was heavily medicated, notarized by an unlicensed associate of your lover, Julian Croft. I don't know who that is, she cried. Vivian stood. That's funny, she said, dropping a stack of glossy 8x10 photos on the table. Because here you are with him on a yacht in the Bahamas while your husband was dying in hospice. The room erupted in whispers and gasps. Serafina staggered back, her face a canvas of pure horror. This is slander. No, I said, my voice quiet, but carrying across the stunned silence. I stood and placed sealed envelope in the center of the table. This is truth. I opened it and read Liam's last words aloud. When I finished, a sob broke from Liam's aunt. Serafina's face twisted, fury and fear, warring for control. You can't prove any of this. We already have, Arthur said calmly. The forensics report, the sworn testimony from the hospice aide, the bank records showing you draining his accounts, and the recording. Serafina, Vivian added softly, of you and Julian planning it all. That was the final blow. The mask didn't just crack, it shattered. She looked around the room, her eyes darting from face to face, search for an ally. There were none. Even her own parents, seated at the far end, looked away in shame. It's not what it looks like, she whispered. But it was. It was exactly what it looked like. A woman who saw a dying man, not as a husband, but as an obstacle. I stepped forward, holding a photo of Liam holding a newborn Noah, both of them beaming at me. You tried to erase him, Serafina, I said. You tried to erase me, but you failed. We remember. She didn't scream. She just deflated a puppet with its strings cut. She grabbed her purse and fled, the slam of the door echoing her disgrace. No one chased her in the quiet aftermath. Surrounded by family and the truth, Max turned to me. We file first thing Monday. You'll get the house back. You'll get custody of Noah. I nodded, but I wasn't thinking about the house. I was thinking about the quiet boy who used to fall asleep on my chest, and how tonight his voice had finally roared. The courtroom smelled of old wood and stale justice. Serafina sat at the defendant's table, a portrait of shattered arrogance. I sat across the aisle, flanked by my sentinels. The judge, a formidable woman named Pearson, didn't waste time. Max laid out the evidence with devastating precision: forgery, the fraud, the photos, the recordings, the final, heartbreaking email. After hours of testimony, Judge Pearson leaned forward. "Miss Prescott," she said, her voice cutting through the silence, "this court finds overwhelming evidence of will, forgery, financial fraud, and gross emotional and medical neglect. The amended will is hereby nullified." She then turned her gaze to me. "Furthermore, given the defendant's deplorable behavior, full legal guardianship of the minor child Thomas Prescott is granted to his paternal grandmother, Eleanor Prescott." A strangled sound escaped Seraphina's lips. She shot to her feet. "You can't. I'm his mother. You were his wife," the judge corrected coldly. "And he was your victim." The gavel struck the wood with a deafening finality. It was done. Seraphina crumpled, a raw guttural scream tearing from her throat. She turned on me, her eyes wild with hate. "I loved him. You poisoned him again." Me. I stood slowly, meeting her gaze without flinching. "You did that all by yourself." She fled the courtroom, leaving behind nothing but the echo of her own ruin. The house felt smaller than I remembered. Grief had made the walls feel impossibly vast. The silence, a living entity now with the truth out, it had shrunk back to its proper size. A home. I unlocked the front door with the original key, the one I'd kept in my purse for years. I stepped inside, not as a visitor, but as its guardian. I opened the windows, letting the salty Maine air chase out the last vestiges of her perfume and her lies. Brewed chamomile tea, the way Liam liked it upstairs. Noah was napping in his father's old bed, his small chest rising and falling in a peaceful rhythm. He hadn't asked for his mother. Children know they sense the absence of warmth long before adults can name it. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had been dismissed and disregarded, and opened a clean new journal. On the first page, I began to write. "My dearest Noah, one day you will have questions. Real questions. I want you to have the answers. Your father was a good, kind man. A man of quiet strength. He deserved more time. But more than that, he deserved the truth in this house. You will never be fed a lie. Some people might tell you this story is about revenge. It isn't. Revenge is a fire that consumes everything. This was about justice. It was about remembering. I don't need you to avenge your father. We have already honored him by unearthing the truth. All I want is for you to understand this: in every family, someone must be the keeper of the memories, the guardian of the truth. Even if their hands shake, even if the world tells them they are too old, too quiet, too polite to matter in our family, that person was me. And someday my love person might be you." I signed it, "Love, Grandma," and placed the journal in the drawer where Liam used to keep his architectural pencils. The sun was rising, casting long golden stripes across the floor. I opened the front door, not to leave, but to let the morning in. A soft breeze carried the scent of cut grass and forgiveness. I closed the door softly, not to shut out the past, but to begin again, quietly, on our own terms. If you have ever been dismissed, if you have ever been told your voice doesn't matter, know this: truth has no expiration date. And strength is not always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet, stubborn love of a grandmother who refuses to let her family's story be written by a liar. Sometimes justice is served with patience, a pot of tea, and the unshakable memory of what is right.